Let's step into the world of energy. Africa's gearing up for COP27 in Egypt. Conversations continue on the globe continue to revolve around the best pathway to renewables for the fossil-dependent continent. The International Energy Agency says the following: the clean energy transition is an opportunity for many African countries to bypass traditional fuels and infrastructure and go straight to building sustainable energy systems. But they will need the support of the international community, especially to attract the necessary investments. In the meantime, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa chimed with the following: the global drive for green transition and net zero emissions present African countries with risks and enormous opportunities. At the same time, Africa's energy access and transition must be compelling and must be defined and owned by Africa. Joining me to discuss Africa's energy transition pathway is Ejiro Gray. She's the director in charge of governance and sustainability at Sahara Group. Good morning, madam. Thanks for coming.
Good morning. Thank you.
Let's start with the IEA's comments. What do you make of it?
I think the comment is in order. Africa does need support of the international community in driving energy transition. And why do I say so? We're not starting on equal footing. It's not a level playing field. Africa is plagued with issues that are quite unique to us, and that must be taken into consideration if we're going to drive a just transition. It's very important that we understand that we're contending with energy access. We must close that gap. Even within Africa, not all countries are at the same rate of development. Not all countries have the same level of energy access. So it's really important that that is considered in mapping out whatever path is best suited to Africa's goals, especially with regard to development of the continent.
Interesting, but here is UNECA, the UNECA for Africa, talking about the transition must be defined and owned by Africa. Does that mean we need to write our own script of how we want to transit?
It's not so much about writing a script. It's about understanding and identifying what is unique to us. What is foremost for us right now is development, closing the energy gap. And it must be done in such a way that energy transition becomes a natural outcome of that process. So it's very important that we're allowed to drive the process. We're not asking the international community to take the steering wheel from us. We're saying support us. So whatever
we're going in the same direction.
Yes.
But support us.
Yes, support us.
But don't drag us.
Absolutely. It shouldn't be at the behest of the international community. We're aiming towards the same objective globally, but we're saying we will arrive there at different times. That's a reality we have to face.
But we're heading the same direction. But that's the most important point. So let me look at some energy statistics on disproportionate emissions story. Is the takeaway from these 2022 numbers that the energy transition is going to be challenging for Africa if you look at the level of emissions across the continent vis-a-vis the rest of the world?
You know, looking at the statistics, what I would say is energy transition will be challenging for the world regardless. It's not just Africa. Recent happenings with the energy crisis, with the war in Ukraine, it has shown that expediency dictates policy. And so we must understand that and drive this with pragmatism. If anything, what my takeaway from this is that we're not even producing and consuming enough energy in Africa.
So we have energy poverty to deal with.
Yes, and it's reflective in the level of development across the continent. So it's important that we don't lose focus of that. We don't lose sight of that. Whatever we do must not compromise that development agenda. And key to that will be the responsible utilization and exploitation of our resources.
It's a very delicate balancing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So there are fossil fuel defenders who feel Africa should not be hurried by the West into energy transition. These advocates across the continent are beginning to sound a lot more louder. But here you are with some pushback, as we've seen in a number of countries in Europe saying, look, perhaps the East African oil and gas pipeline should not be done. The exploration being planned in DR Congo should be stopped and elsewhere. So what do you make of this advocacy?
I think absolutely Africa needs time. Africa needs three things, actually. We need time to adjust. We need support with policy development and interpretation and implementation. And we also need financial aid. So I think it's important that we take that into perspective. Energy transition will not happen overnight. We will not get to net zero next Tuesday. It's not going to happen that way. So, like I said, pragmatism is key. What works for us? We need time, whether we like it or not, whether the West likes it or not. We do need that time. And it's important that if we're saying we're going for an inclusive transition, No country must be left behind. Like you rightly said when you started off, a lot of countries are heavily reliant on fossil fuels, on the revenue from fossil that drives the economic activity. So it's important that we understand that if we make a sudden and swift deviation from that, a lot of economies will be left in dire straits. And who will suffer? Who will bear the brunt of it? It's you and I. It's not strangers. So it's important that we consider that and that we put people at the core of whatever drives the transition agenda.
Interesting. So do you think we're moving the needle a little bit? For example, here was President Buhari yesterday inaugurating Nigeria's climate change committee, or as it were. We pledged 2060, and we also talk about whether we can do a debt for climate swap and whatever. Do you think we're beginning to see sovereigns and governments beginning to talk and act along that corridor of taking steps, perhaps baby steps, but at least?
Absolutely.
Are you enthused by what you're hearing?
Yes, I am enthused by what I'm hearing. And what I look forward to is seeing the policies and the framework, the governance framework that will support these initiatives, because the policy, the framework, the energy transition drive, whatever plans we have in place are just as good as the framework that will support it. Implementation is key. That's where there might be a tendency to get things wrong. So it's important that we get that right. That framework, the legal framework, the regulatory framework, the governance framework must be in place to drive the initiatives and to drive the plan.
Interesting, but what about the energy companies themselves in the private sector, such as yours?
So, the energy companies, even with the best of intentions, they need an enabling environment to drive the agenda in order to own energy transition and to, bring about real and tangible changes. However, that's not to say that they should remain stagnant. I mean, companies like Sahara Energy, Sahara Group, as a fully integrated company, we're going ahead, we're forging ahead to do things to change the narrative, to drive innovation. We recently became a member of CO2 CRC. It's a leading research institute in Australia. It's made up of governments from different nations, the academia, and other private sector companies. And they all came together with one objective. They want to see improvements and progress in the science and engineering behind carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and other low emissions technologies. So we're very keen on that, and we're keen on bringing those learnings to this part of the world for implementation. We're also, if across our power plants, the Egbin power plants, First Independent Power Company, Ikeja Electric, we're keen on investing in renewable energy. We're, first of all, even developing our internal capacity in that space. And then beyond that, we're also leveraging on partnerships, to drive this agenda and to ensure that we don't remain static. Because, like I said, even though a lot of economies are heavily reliant on fossil fuel, the danger of not taking action is there might be radical changes in policy direction internationally that would then affect the demand for our main export commodity. So it's important that we're proactive. We're pushing the gas agenda. We're pushing renewable energy.
Where would you see some help that you need moving forward at a corporate level, businesses level, that you need to fast track some of the actions you're taking as an operator on the ground?
It definitely will be in the area of creating an enabling environment by the government. And what I mean by that is the companies, not just energy companies, businesses in general, the private sector should be incentivized to make changes. The enabling environment must be there. The sector, especially with regard to renewable energy, must be de-risked. Because you find that with a lot of businesses, a lot of projects, a lot of development projects hardly go beyond feasibility stage in this part of the world. Why? Because of the risks that are attendant with investing in this part of the world. So it's important that we de-risk the sector, and then we start to encourage. Of course, there should also be disincentives to prevent the proclivity to maintain status quo. However, the disincentives should either run concurrently or come after the incentives, because you don't want a situation where the outcome is counterproductive and you end up killing businesses. So it's important that we drive the incentives and motivate that change.
I'm sure Sahara Energy will be at the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh as an international energy company group. So what are you expecting from COP? This is the first time in Africa. Yes, it's been called an Africa's COP27. What are you looking at for?
There's been the clamor for inclusivity, for just transition. So what I would expect to see is a situation where the countries are coming together to help Africa map out an energy transition pathway that is just, it's inclusive, no one is left behind. It's tailored to Africa's specific and unique needs. And it's collaborative in that we have their support and that they make good on their commitments of developed countries to help the developing countries along this path.
You think we should take the driver's seat in Egypt?
I think we should take the driver's seat in Egypt. We have to live with the consequences of the decisions taken there. It's important that we have, ownership of it.
Do you think we're having a common agenda, common front to be presented in Sharm el-Sheikh to the rest of the world?
Yes, I do think so. I do.
That narrative.
So. That narrative it's an agenda that is common to all African countries. We understand it, and even though the African countries in themselves are at varying levels of development, but we understand that our needs are peculiar, and it must be driven from our own narrative.
Great. Sharm el-Sheikh is going to be very interesting, by the way. How much more do you think the rest of the world should do for us in terms of funding?
With the Nigerian Energy Transition Plan, we need about $1.9 trillion, yes, to reach net zero in 2060. So that's a lot.
Average 140 billion per year or so.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's a lot, and that's just speaking of Nigeria. What about the other countries? So I think it's really important, especially because you would find that though our emission levels are quite low relative to the rest of the world, we are hugely impacted by climate change.
We suffer the most.
Yes, we do suffer the most, unfortunately. So it's important for them to take their role of playing support very seriously. It's also important for us as Africans to also take climate change seriously because it's not going anywhere.
Do you think we should be, across Africa, we should be spending or saving some of our fossil fuel revenue to deal with the climate adaptation issues?
Absolutely, absolutely. There must be commitment. We must put our money where our mouth is.
The rest of the world to bring money.
They can't do everything for us.
We're not putting anything on the table.
They can't do everything for us. So it's important that we ourselves are just as committed to driving that change. And this is why I say the private sector should also emulate companies like the Sahara Group, in driving that change, because the government won't do everything for us. Okay. So we must also take the initiative.
You're going to tell me next time how much you folks are putting on the table. But let's leave that for that. I just want to put you on the spot. It's nice speaking with you. Thank you so much for being on the show this morning.